We have a need to search out our Hebraic roots to discover what truth has been altered. This intensive study, still in progress since 2007, has gathered scattered and hidden pearls of knowledge that prove to be truth and put them together in these series of teachings. Not everything that a particular ministry teaches is wrong, but on the other hand, neither is everything taught by man entirely correct, including my teachings. Only one, and that is Yeshua, was truth incarnate. His original words were entirely correct always. Not everybody has all the truth, but we are allowed to study, discern, and glean the truth from those around us. So we're looking at our claims again as to what has been added. Under section 10, L is 3 kings. Everybody celebrates Christmas, which we have just recently done, or we haven't done. And they say that 3 kings appeared to the baby Yeshua, Jesus, and brought him presents. Matthew 2:1, the HRB, Hebraic Roots Bible. When Yeshua had been born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, Magi arrived from the east to Jerusalem. There was Magi. Matthew 2:11. And having come into the house, they saw the child with his mother Miriam, and falling down they worshipped him, and opening their treasures they presented gifts to him, gold and frankincense and myrrh. So these Magi come, doesn't say 3, and they came into the house. Matthew 2:1, the King James Version. Now when Yeshua was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem. There were no kings and no numbers and no shepherds at the same time. The tradition that there were only 3 Magi stems from the assumption that each gave one gift to Yeshua. No one knows how many Magi there were who went to Jerusalem, but some traditions mention as many as 12. We have no way of knowing their exact number or how many people were in their entourage. The word that was used to describe them was Magi. This was the title, and in the first century it signified that they were professional astrologers. This fact is so well known in scholarly circles that many modern translators of the New Testament simply render Magi as astrologers without explanation. We see them in the Bible in the court of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. In fact, the Magi held Daniel in very high esteem because he had saved the lives of the Magi of Daniel's day. King Nebuchadnezzar had a horrifying dream sent to him from Yahweh, a dream he could neither remember the details nor what it meant. The king gathered together all his wise men, including Daniel, and demanded they tell him what the dream was and what it meant. He threatened all the wise men with death if they could not tell him what he dreamed and what it meant. As the king's soldiers were rounding up all the wise men to put them to death, Daniel asked for a 1-day extension. That night, after much prayer from Daniel and his 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azareth, that Yahweh would reveal the dream to Daniel. Yahweh did, and King Nebuchadnezzar spared the lives of Daniel, his 3 friends, and all the Magi. Daniel 2:1-19. But they knew of all Daniel's writings, undoubtedly had copies of the book of Daniel, and they knew of the prophecy of Daniel 9:24-27. At the time of the appearance of the star, they knew that they were within a lifetime of this prophecy coming to pass. When they saw the star, their knowledge of this remarkable price prophecy, plus the promptings of the Holy Spirit, caused them to embark on the very long journey to Israel to pay their homage to the Jewish Messiah. The king had placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Did Daniel himself leave the Magi instructions to give his fortune to the newborn king, as he was a eunuch with no wife or children? Matthew 2:16, HRB. Then seeing that he was mocked by the Magi, Herod was greatly enraged, and having sent, he killed all the boys in Bethlehem and in all its districts from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he exactly asked from the Magi. The child was about 15 months old, not a newborn baby. Was this the means of allowing them to flee and live in Egypt for a period of time? Matthew 2:13. And they having departed, a cherub of Yahweh appeared to Joseph by a dream, saying, Rise up, take the child and his mother with you, and flee into Egypt, and be there until I shall tell you, for Herod is about to look for the child in order to destroy him. Even the gifts which the Magi brought to Yeshua suggest that they were being prompted by Daniel's prophecy, and fully understood the prophetic and religious implications of Yeshua's birth, ministry, and death. Consider the gifts they presented to Yeshua. Gold. Daniel said in 9:25 that the coming Messiah was to be a prince. This term denotes royalty, a king. Gold was the perfect gift for a king. 2. Frankincense. Yahweh stipulated in Exodus 30:34-36 that frankincense was to be prepared for the purpose of sacrificial fumigation. Yeshua was killed on Calvary as the perfect sacrifice which would be acceptable to Yahweh to take away the sins of all who would accept it. Did Daniel's prophecy reveal this sacrificial aspect? Yes, in 9:26. Yahweh revealed that Messiah would be cut off, sacrificially killed. Interestingly, frankincense was also used by the priests during the regular service in the temple. Therefore, this frankincense gift would also point to Jesus Christ as the ultimate high priest, an office which he assumed after his ascension into heaven. Myrrh. The Jews used myrrh for embalming bodies for burial preparation. Again, the verse quoted above would have prepared the Magi to bring this gift. 2 of the 3 gifts which Magi presented to baby Yeshua related to his death and burial. The Daniel prophecy contained all the information which the Magi needed to know to bring these gifts. They studied this prophecy in its entirety and knew exactly the kind of gifts to bring. Why Israel's spiritual leaders missed this prophecy when the pagan Magi did not? The answer is really quite simple. Several hundred years before Christ was born, Jewish leaders began to believe and propagate 2 grievously erroneous teachings. First, they taught that the sacred scriptures could not be taken literally because they were not totally inspired by Yahweh and thus contained errors. Secondly, they taught that the prophecies were not to be taken literally but spiritually. Prophetic books such as Daniel were not even taught anymore because they contained so much prophecy. After several generations had come and gone, each teaching and believing this nonsense, spiritual leaders of Yeshua's day were completely unaware of this prophecy. Thus, they were unaware of the time of their visitation. The importance of the Magi. These Magi came from the east bearing rich gifts for the newborn king. They could not have been reckoned as a certain class of sorcerers and confidence men who roamed the Roman world under the name Magi. Herod and all Jerusalem would hardly have been troubled by what they considered impostors. But if the Magi had come from the court of the Parthian kings, who employed Magi in the religious affairs of their government, or from the respected Magian College of the East, then that would have been a different matter in the view of Herod and the Jewish authorities in Jerusalem. In order to have an audience with Herod and for him to have members of the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court of the Jews, to hear the interpretation of these Magi must show that they were held in high esteem by the people of Jerusalem. In their deportment, it was customary for the Magi to dress in magnificent priestly attire to indicate their professional status. In presenting themselves before royalty, the historical records show that the Magi did this with pomp and circumstance. In travelling or on official business in areas where their influence was felt, it was normal for the priestly Magi to proceed in a processional mode with various ranks of them appropriately positioned in the caravan. This must have been the manner in which they approached the city of Jerusalem to present their gifts to the newborn king of the Jews. This would account for the respectful attitude of Herod and the Jewish authorities to them. It is important to realise that this type of travel for respected Magian priests is not a fantasy story. They travelled in majestic style. The account recorded by Matthew fits well with other journeys of Magian priests when they were presented to kings or emperors. When the Tiridates of the order of the Magi was made king over Armenia by the Emperor Nero, the new Magian king went to Rome with the other Magi to present gifts to Nero. A great deal of ceremony was associated with this visit of the Magi. This must also have been the case with the Magi who come to Herod. He would have given them a proper ceremonial protocol. This is why all Jerusalem knew of their coming and why members of the Sanhedrin were summoned to hear their interpretations on the star which they had seen. The account in Matthew harmonises perfectly with other historical events involving Magi at the time of the early Roman Empire. The professional role of the Magi. There is a considerable amount of early information about the Magi of the East. We are told by the ancient historian Herodotus that they were originally one of the 6 tribes of the Medes, a priestly caste similar to the Levites among the Israelites. In their early history, their occupation was to provide the kings of the Medes, Persians and Babylonians with what they considered to be divine information about the daily matters involving government affairs. Because of the high religious and political esteem accorded them by the peoples of the East, they were able in the 6th century BCE even to overturn some royal powers. Their role in interpreting divine matters for kings and rulers is mentioned in the Bible. The prophet Daniel in the time of King Nebuchadnezzar became the master of the magicians, master of the Magi, astrologers, Chaldeans and soothsayers. The prophet Jeremiah mentioned that a chief authority among the Magi was called the Rev Alexander. The prophet Daniel must have been assigned to this high office. Perhaps the fraternization of Daniel with the early Magi in Babylon helps to explain why those in the Magian profession expected a Jewish king to arrive near the end of the 1st century. This is the very thing that Daniel prophesied would happen. Recall that Daniel prophesied the rebuilding of Jerusalem after the Babylonians destroyed it in the 6th century BCE. He also said that 490 years would pass from a command to rebuild Jerusalem until a world-embracing messianic kingdom would emerge on the earth in the region of Palestine. The prophecy had numerous unknown factors associated with it. For example, Daniel did not clearly explain which command to rebuild Jerusalem was meant. He did not say whether his year lengths were lunar or solar. Regarding the Messiah, Daniel did not indicate if the 490 years would end with his birth, his bar mitzvah, when he would become 20 years of age and able to go to war, when he would become 30, the year of spiritual adulthood, or whenever the Messiah would be proclaimed king, which could happen at any time during his life. Most Jews admire the Magi of the East. This was not only because of their former association with the prophet Daniel, but also because they were not idolaters. Though the Magi believed that the power of the deity was manifested in the natural elements of fire, water, air and earth, these Gentile priests did not set up material images in recognition of him. They were, in one way looking at it, Gentiles who were learning towards monolithic belief. We are told in the New Testament that the main factors that brought the Magi to Jerusalem was his star. What star or heavenly body could this have been? Though there was an interesting conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 7 BC, with Mars forming a triangular aspect with those planets in early 6 BCE. The planets at that time were at least 2 diameters of the moon away from one another, and they could not in any way be considered as a single star. As for the years of 5 and 4 BCE, there was nothing of astronomical importance that would have impressed anyone to journey to Jerusalem. But in 3 and 2 BCE, the whole heavens burst forth with astronomical signs and wondrous displays. It may well be that the celestial currents in this latter period of time were the very ones that prompted the Magi to go to Jerusalem. Since they were astrologers, we should look in the contemporary historical records of this period for astronomical events that could be interpreted and understood within an astrological context. In explaining to King Herod why they came to do homage to the New Jerusalem king, the Magi said, "We saw his star at its rising," or when it rose. The New English Bible gives the proper translation, "We observed the rising of his star." The plain meaning of the word suggests that the Magi had witnessed a star rise above the eastern horizon when they made their normal pre-dawn observations of the heavens. The Magi saw an actual star. There is no doubt that the New Testament is using normal astronomical terms to describe these events. The narrative clearly shows that the Magi observed an ordinary star or planet ascending above the eastern horizon, which they interpreted as a sign that a Jewish king was now within his nativity period. It was one star that intrigued them, though it must have been in some unusual relationship or aspect with other celestial bodies. The Magi were so impressed that they made their long, difficult journey to Jerusalem with costly gifts to present to the new king. After hearing their account, King Herod and all Jerusalem were equally persuaded that the star was significant. Remember, this period of time was one when astrological interpretations made by first-class professionals were looking on as a valid scientific indications of impending events. So confident was the Roman government about such matters that some 60 years before, the Roman Senate ordered that all boy babies must not be allowed to live in 63 BCE, when astrological and prodigious forecasts had determined a king of the Romans was to be born. This early event would have been well known to Herod and to people throughout the Roman Empire. To secure its supported validity in the opinion of people at the time, Augustus Caesar was indeed born in that very year. Herod must have felt a great deal of uneasiness when a similar prognostications were being made by the Magi about a king of the Jews who had been born. The world at that time believed astrological signs. Herod would have been aware of the outstanding celestial displays that had occurred from May 3 BCE to August 2 BCE. His own court astrologers would certainly have given him their interpretations of these remarkable signs. But Herod wanted more information, since the various nations and racial groups had different standards for astrological interpretations. Herod would have wanted to know the Magian version of what the signs were indicating. Some astrologers were reckoned as being better than others. Among the best in the world as viewed by people in the first century were the professional Chaldeans and the Magi of the East. Herod wanted to know what their interpretations were regarding the remarkable heavenly drama that had occurred in 3 and 2 BCE. The Magi left him in no doubt about their interpretations. They were so certain of their evaluations that they made a long journey to Jerusalem to give rich gifts to the newborn king. So important was this child to them that they even came as well to give him homage. This meant that they recognized the newborn as a personage of special significance. This is what Matthew in the New Testament related. And indeed, like the Romans 60 years before, Herod was so convinced of the interpretation of the Magi that he killed the boy babies in and around Bethlehem to prevent this newborn king from being reared to adulthood. Herod was astonished by the appearance of this star, and he was persuaded that the star of the Magi was significant and important. Yeshua was born on the holy day of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Torah, on September the 29th in 2 BC or 3 BCE. The day of sounding the shofar began. This celebration is variously known as the Rosh Hashanah, head of the year, or Yom Torah, the day of trumpets or feast of trumpets. This holy day is also the day from which the reign of the king was accounted. No matter what day of the year a king in Israel began to reign, it was counted from Tishri 1 to Tishri 1. The Son of the Almighty Yahweh, born of a virgin on that day, would become the king of every and all kings, reigning forever. This feast is a very joyful celebration which begins the accounting of a new civil year on the Jewish calendar, as it marked the transition into a new year. A time such as the world had never known had finally arrived. The civil year relates specifically to government, and so it may be noted what was written for our benefit by the prophet Isaiah. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Isaiah 9:6. Amen. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.